Hello everyone, welcome back. We're looking at part 3 of this MAAS installation guide and quick start. Last time we stopped off at this screen actually. We had just put in 20.04 LTS, but this time I'm not going to. It's not very important, to be honest. Basically what we're going to try here is going to be setting up the network, setting up DHCP. It's going to throw two errors in this case. One of them is that I need to add a boot images. I need to add boot images so that way they can be provisioned properly when we add machines. But more importantly, we want to set up the network structure that we want to deploy machines on, right? So you'll see that the IP address of my virtual machine is 172.208.128.216. That's just an internal IP address that Hyper-V just kind of creates by itself. You can go under, we're looking at Hyper-V settings, and then you can go to, actually where is it? Under Virtual Switch Manager, and you can set up different switches. On the different switch you can tell whether it's an internal, an external, or a private, and then you can even do stuff with how MAC addresses that can be dynamic. Yeah, see, so like dynamically assigning a MAC address to each virtual adapter, so you can tell it like what you want them to be. So it's actually a little important. I mean, you're not actually going to change that setting, but just for networking standpoint, you can also just look at Virtual Switch Manager just to see what you got going on. I have a Docker net that gets installed manually, or automatically rather, when you install Docker from a different installation, so you can ignore that. Default switch is typically the one. It's really the only one that they're going on right now. As you can see, it's an internal network, and so it's just defaulting to internal connection, and then it uses my internet to go out, basically. What's important here is that we go under the subnets, and you can see that MAAS already knows about the single subnet that we have, because that's the one that MAAS is living on. In a production environment, you'll have multiple VLANs, basically different segments of the network that you either want to have intercommunication with, or you don't want intercommunication with. And for MAAS's sake, you do want them to be able to communicate. So honestly, for a home environment, something simple, something small, just to mess around with, just use a single subnet. It's going to make your life a lot easier. Because especially if you're trying to do multiple machine configurations with MAAS, unless you're going to use MAAS CLI, you'll have to go into each machine and manually configure the network adapters the way you want them to be. So what we're actually just going to do here is go into the subnet, and we want to edit the subnet. We need to basically just turn on DHCP. Let's find out where that goes. I thought it was under, and let's see, where are we? Map subnet, no, let's just go back into networks, and DHCP, okay, here we go. So you enable it under the VLAN rather than the subnet. You can give it start and stop IP addresses, so we're just gonna go from like 100 to 254, honestly 100 to 200. I'm not going to have 200. And it's going to provide DHCP from the rack controller. So if you remember last time, actually, if we click up at controllers, you'll be able to see that this one virtual machine is a region and a rack controller, right? So the region controller does different things from the rack controller. And actually, if I click into it, you'll see that there are 9 services running, right? And if you had a difference between a rack controller and a region controller, and you had 2 different machines rather, you'd be able to see that I think one of them only runs 8 services and the other runs 6 or 4 or something like that. To be honest with you, I forget which ones do which, because it's not too important for just a brief overview of what it does. RACD has HTTP, TFTP, and now DHCP, right? So you have RACD, which is basically just the HTTP and the TFTP services, and those are under RACD. But then you have region D, bind 9, which is just your DNS zones, NTP for time, proxy we're not using, syslog obviously for logging, and DHCP for handing out IP addresses essentially. Now what we're going to do, I've already kind of pre-staged this and just created another virtual machine. The important part is going to be booting off of the network adapter. So going into BIOS and making sure that you're booting under your legacy network adapter, or whatever adapter it is that you got going on there for network, because this is all going to work off of Pixie Boot. So if you're familiar with Pixie Boot, basically it's just a way to boot up machines on the network and have it hit like a fog server or something and boot into an image. Essentially, MAAS is the thing that then controls what images to use, right? So I like CentOS a lot better than Ubuntu, just because I feel like Ubuntu is really good for beginners, but I think CentOS honestly is also really good for beginners. I don't see that there's much of a difference between most of Linux distributions that I've used, but while this downloads, I guess, a quick brief thing about Linux distributions. The difference realistically is just your package management. Like, that's the first glaring difference that you're gonna see. Ubuntu uses apt and CentOS uses yum, and I just found the yum to be not more reliable, but just a little bit easier to use. I mean, you just, regardless of what it is you're doing, I know the difference is like that there's an ARM architecture, and then like there's Debian and like CentOS and RHEL, but honestly, I don't find much of an issue using either. The only one honestly that I've had an issue with using was Manjaro. So I'm gonna make a video on Manjaro after I get a handle on it, but Manjaro looks cool and it feels nice to use, but it's definitely a little bit more interesting. So yeah, that's what I'm gonna do next. So syncing to rack controllers, which is fine because we only really have one rack controller. And now you can see that it says that it's syncing it, which just means that typically it'd be syncing the image that you just downloaded on one rack controller to the other rack controller, but we only have the one, so it's not too important. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt this. I don't know if it's going to work, so we're going to find out together. Let's see if I need to do anything. Boot failure, reboot, and select proper device, or insert. Okay. So it's not happy with booting off the network. Okay, I'm gonna pause the video here. I'll figure out what the issue is, and then I will come back to it. That way the video is not too long. Okay, so I think I found what the issue is, and it's saying basically that because we have the default network adapter, which is this one, that's not gonna work, and we actually should remove this one if we can. But basically it's saying just to add a legacy network adapter and do it through there. So let's try that. We're going to do legacy, and we're going to put it on the default switch. We're going to apply, and then, is there a way to delete this? Yeah, remove, there we go. And then apply, and okay. And now, in theory, we should be able to, right? So that's what this little article is telling us. And let's see. Yeah, okay, so it looks like more progress. Yeah, there we go. Alright, so you can already see that it's booting under the MAAS direction, which basically just means that it's contacted the Pixie server, which is MAAS, and MAAS is telling it what to do here. I don't know how much of this is going to work, so let's just see. Typically, it kind of goes a little bit quicker. There it goes, okay. I guess just, I did only give it a gig of RAM, but so yeah, now we can either see that it's going to be a device or a machine after it enlists, right? So basically, the life cycle of a MAAS machine is it's pretty simple, actually. So you get a machine, it starts off and it's classified as a new machine, right? So then a new machine can be commissioned, and it's so see it's enlisting the node. It does a bunch of different things here. It just kind of syncs it up, figures out what it is, figures out kind of machine it is. If it's a physical one, it'll tell you service tag and all that fun stuff that sometimes you need to know. There it goes. That's my favorite, honestly. MAAS, it's so gimmicky. I love it. Tidy and power. Like nobody thinks of these things except for Canonical. I like it. So yeah, so now it's gonna do. I mean, it says it's commissioning, but I call this the pre-commissioning phase because this is the phase where it just kind of understands what this machine has, hardware-wise and resource-wise. And then after that, you have your own commissioning, which you can then add like certain parts or certain like additions to it through the commissioning scripts. But typically, it just kind of goes through the pre-commissioning, I like to call it. Then you commission it afterwards, right? I don't know if you need to. I'm remembering just from the project that sometimes they'd come in as new machines and they wouldn't automatically commission. So I'll see, I guess, at the end of this to see if this is actually just going to commission fully or if it's going to do that thing where it just hangs out at new and your only option is commissioning. So I'm not too sure so see, now it's a new machine. We're hanging out. You can see that the machine's turned off completely now. If we go into it, you'll be able to see that it's a virtual machine with the vendor type Microsoft Corporation. You'll also be able to see that the adapter it got. If you remember with this, I don't know if you remember, and we go over to the virtual switch manager, this is why I was saying it might be important to you, is that it started giving it the MAC address based on your virtual switch management settings, right? So that might be important for you. It almost never is in my case, but it's good to know. Link speed, 0 megabytes, just because it's an internal, probably because it's a legacy network adapter, so it doesn't really know what the link speed is, and what fabric it's on. Now the fabric is interconnected subnets. Now the MAAS gets into these different organizational units and different logical containers of the network options and network items that you have, so it's not too important right away. It's definitely something that for production networks and stuff like that, and if you're actually deploying this for your company, you're going to want to look at their documentation to see exactly what is what and what you need for your deployment, because it's going to be a little bit different depending on how advanced the deployment is. And actually, I'll put this in the description, but there is in their documentation, this portion is, it might not be helpful for many people, but it definitely was for me. It kind of gives you a rundown of like almost like a scenario of how you could use like MAAS in a 100-bed hospital that's under construction. So like you're already like you're given an idea, because if you're like me, I'm not creative, right? So I'm not creative at all, which means that I'm learning something and I'm like, okay, what's it used for, right? Like, give me a use for it. What can I do with this? I'm not going to think of this stuff myself most of the time. If you give me a problem and you say solve it, then I can, theory craft an idea behind it. But I can't just sit down and be like, oh yeah, here's a cool system, let me deploy blank, right? Like I got nothing. So yeah, this is pretty helpful to understand the different network types and stuff like that. And then it'll kind of tell you, here's the resource pools and a bunch of different things. You got your VLANs, fabrics, and then spaces, right? So they're kind of all over the place. But you'll see that I only gave it a gig of RAM, 1 core. It's going to use one of the cores that I have in my CPU, so it knows about it. The commissioning scripts that ran, you can see them here. Capture LLDP, that was pretty important for my project because all of them were on LLDP. LACP, that's completely different. So install LLDP. So you can kind of go through these and see if you want to add any more scripts to commissioning. Then you'd go under here and upload your script. You can see that it's actually going to be a .sh file, so it's important to make sure that it's a shell script. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So now we're ready to commission it. And if we go into commissioning, you can, let's say if you're there's a few settings here. If you've used this machine before and you want to retain the storage information, let's say they all have hardware RAIDs with like a perk card, a perk, then you can just click on retain storage, retain network config if you've dialed into it before commissioning it and saying like, okay, I'll add an interface, create bonds, create bridge, whatever the case may be. But we're just going to commission it. And unconfigured power type, please configure the power type. And okay, so let's see. If we go under machines and configuration, power type, let's see if we can configure. I know it's not. All right, let's look at Hyper-V power type. And again, I'll pause this video just until I figure this out, and then I'll come back and let you guys know what it was. Okay, so I did a bit of looking around, and it looks like you can do it a couple different ways. If you wanted to install some different modules, there's apparently some people that do it through Wake on LAN, like magic packets, and then the other people do it through like other modules that you can download. I don't really feel like adding any more applets to my PowerShell and whatnot, so we're just going to keep it manual here. And now this is just kind of telling you that power control obviously is going to have to be manual. So if I go to commission and I just hit commission, then it's going to wait until I hit start. And now we're just going to hit continue. And then you'll see that in a second, it's going to start commissioning, right? And when you hit commission, it just kind of goes through basically it reruns the commissioning step that it did in the beginning, but it also does the tests. So it's going to try and do the smart control validate test on the hard drive. Nothing too crazy here. We've pretty much seen what this looks like. So I'll go ahead and pause this video until this is done commissioning, and then we'll do a deployment. So that'll be fun. Okay, so it's pretty much done now with doing the commissioning. I can tell because it's saying starting power off, but MAAS doesn't know how to power this back on, or power it off or on. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it off, because at this point it doesn't know how to continue because MAAS doesn't know how to tell it to turn off. So the status is unknown. I'm just going to tell it turn off. Fellas, boys, lads. Okay, we're gonna hold on. We're gonna give this 1 gigabyte of RAM something to think about. Okay, there it goes. Okay, now it should be ready to deploy. So it's still unknown, but whatever. We know that that's the case. I'm gonna hit deploy. Now I have the option to choose my, I can choose my CentOS, or I can choose my Ubuntu. I only have the 1.18.04. I like using the HWE one just because after talking with some of the canonical guys in my previous projects, this might just be better, that's all I'll say for that, but without getting too crazy. We're going to go ahead and deploy that machine. Starting deployment. It wants to start, so I'm going to start it. Now, in a real scenario, you'd realistically only use MAAS for bare metal deployments in a, like I said, realistic environment. So when it comes to the power configuration, you won't really have to worry about that because most servers have something called out-of-band management, which is just basically when the machine is turned off, it's not really off. You still have access to a bit of program under or on top of the BIOS. And that is typically now it's standardized as the Redfish API. So HPILO,
Supermicros, Dell, they all pretty much are the same, and they all are synchronized with the standard of Redfish API, which means that at some level MAAS can control the power, whether it be through a direct iDRAC connection through Dell, or IPMI connection for Supermicro, or ILO. And I mean, you've seen like when I hit power type, there's a bunch of different options there. So now the one mistake that I've made so far is that I didn't upload an SSH key, right? So what that means is as soon as this finishes, then it's not gonna put an SSH key. It's not gonna upload an SSH key to the known hosts here. So I won't actually be able to get into this host after it's done deploying, because there's no, and this happened during my other project. So something to be wary of, something to make sure that you do first. That way you can get into the machine afterwards. But yeah, that's honestly pretty much it. There are some errors that I encountered with a more, I guess, complex deployment of MAAS when it comes to how and when you want the network to communicate. Basically, just while it's deploying, a brief explanation of it. I know this video is already too long, but basically, with two different VLANs, you want one that's going to provision the VM and do all of this stuff, and then you want another one which is your actual production IP address. You don't want MAAS to be controlling your production nodes, right? Like, if it's on production, you want those to be statically assigned through, you know, an Ansible playbook, or however you want to, maybe Juju. You want to use their next step in this provisioning and then configuration management. It's a good idea, but you don't want to have MAAS. You know, let's say you turn off a machine and you turn it back on, and it, for whatever reason, forgets that that's like a node that it already knows about, and then it goes ahead and just recommissions it, you know, and releases it from ownership, and then you lose all your, it'd be a mess. So you want to make sure you have two different networks, and that's where we ran into issues. So yeah, that's really just about it. I can't get into this, obviously. Usually, if you deploy CentOS, the username would be CentOS, and if you deploy Ubuntu, it would be Ubuntu. You can't log in with the same administrative credentials that you use to log into MAAS. You do have to upload an SSH key. If you're scatterbrained like I am and you forget to, you have to redeploy the machine. So don't do that. And that's just about it. As always, please don't forget to like and subscribe, hit that notification bell, and stay tuned for more style or more videos of this style, where we kind of go through a basic deployment of something, and eventually we're going to slowly get more and more complex. We are done with MAAS, so give yourself a pat on the back if you've been following along, and if not, rewatch them. Go ahead. It's very easy. Anybody can do this. And yeah, the next step now, we're going to do probably Sensu. I'm thinking about either Sensu or diving into like different Linux distributions. I do also want to make maybe a video about like home phone systems, because I think a lot of people waste so much money on like Optimum phone bills and stuff like that. It is not that expensive, and yeah, it's such a waste of money. So we might go into that in another video, and we might talk about free PBX and asterisk systems that are very easy to set up, very easy to maintain, and also pretty cool. So yeah, have a good one, fellas.